Okay, thank you, Sarah. So hello, everyone. So my name is Nicolas Doué. I work in the cultural services at the French Embassy and the Consulate General in Chicago in the Midwest. So the goal of the French cultural services is to provide Americans, both individuals and also organizations, with access and resources to engage with French culture and share it in their own communities. So I would like to thank everyone for joining in the celebration of the 100-year anniversary of the Presse Universitaire de France. And I'm very honored to present the first collaborative event called The Bridges to the Future, 100 Years of French Thought, which hosts bright thinkers that have been published by the Presse Universitaire de France. So this series was made possible through the partnership between the French Cultural Services, the Department of French and Italian, and the Center of Excellence at Ohio State University. And so we hope that this will lead to many more similar events in the future. So one of the participants of this series, Renan Larue, is welcomed today by Ohio State University and Sarah. So Renan Larue is a writer and teacher of French at the University of California in Santa Barbara, where he created a vegan studies program. So thank you, Renan. Thank you, Sandra from the PUF, and Sarah Benjamin from Ohio State University, and also Catherine from the Cultural Services in New York, and every one of you for making these wonderful exchanges possible. So the next event will be held October 12 in French with Clotilde de Grille to discuss sexual consent, but we will maybe talk about it at the conclusion. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Renan.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's wonderful to have this opportunity. I'm going to share my screen now and do some introductory work here. There we go. So the idea to invite Renan Larue comes within this course I teach called La Cuisine Française, Gastronomic Culture, Language and Expression at Ohio State. Do I need to swap displays? Can you see this properly? It looks good. Okay. So again, this is the title. I'll throw this up so everyone can see it for our talk today. And it's inspired by kind of a topic that I normally teach in the course, but it was wonderful to have this opportunity to speak one-on-one with kind of an expert on the history of talking about politicizing food. And as Nicolas Doué said, this is within this wonderful kind of festival called Bridges to the Future, 100 Years of French Thought. And you can see some of the other campuses that are bringing people. There are many opportunities around the Midwest right now. I understood that this was the next talk in the series, and there's a link here. And you can see that this series is sponsoring all kinds of different thinkers on many different topics. So I hope you can tune in to Tristan Garcia. Okay, and I want to do some thanking too. We're very grateful to Nicolas, the cultural attaché whom you just heard speak, to Catherine Gebhardt, who helped with the organization and was very thoughtful for it. The Ohio State University Center for Excellence, especially to my colleague Benjamin Hoffman, who has put so much work into bringing the center and helping to organize some of the talks, and of course to the Department of French and Italian. So my name is Sarah Grace Heller, Professor Heller to my students. And Nicolas Doué did a nice job of beginning to introduce Renan. I hear some of the books that he has written. I would, of course, recommend that you go find them. I've ordered them for our library at OSU, although it seems that books are taking a while to arrive from Europe right now. So soon you can come check them out. Renan started, well, interested in all sorts of things, but he did his master's in classics, actually. And so, as you know, as you're thinking about the line of your studies, students, you can look at his CV and see how your ideas can develop kind of one after another. And he was interested in ideas of vegetarianism in Greek and Latin cultures, but then he did his PhD on Enlightenment. So neoclassical, I guess we can see that link, and kind of a rise of vegetarian thinking among intellectuals in 18th century France. Some of the things he's interested in are kind of theories, both sociological and philosophical ideas. Anthropocentrism is a key word, looking at religion and veganism. And he kind of offers, as a French person teaching in America, living in America, that wonderful outsider's perspective on America's role in agriculture and consumption, right? A little bit like the Persians in Montesquieu's letters, perhaps, or some of Voltaire's characters looking, well, they were fictitious, of course. And as Nicolas said, he's created a vegan studies program. Okay, so I want to give the group just a little bit of background on what I had the students read and then what Renan submitted to us to read. So the objective of this particular class in our syllabus is to understand ways that food has been politicized in French culture. So the students read, I have an excerpt up here on the screen, Une viande de qualité dans le respect de la nature. So they're thinking about food, agribusiness, ecological gastronomy, and I spelled that in the French way. They read a little bit about a figure named José Bové, who has opposed big agriculture, has done kind of, how do you say, manifestation, where they were covering, they were bulldozing to make way for McDonald's, kind of taking away farmland in the service of large strip malls and things like that, and also the anti-GOM movement. So Maud Roucan, in this little essay, talks about growing up on a farm, living with the family among animals, having a good steak, from their animals, roast chicken, omelet with their eggs, things, having the milk come straight from the cow, never needing to go to the supermarket in the summer, and talking about how that rural life was part of her values. So I think this is a nice example, very quickly here, of this notion of ecological gastronomy, the small farm. All right, my students also read an excerpt from Renan Larue's book that was mentioned earlier, La Pensée Végane. So these were some of the key ideas that the students needed to discuss and consider. So in this excerpt, the authors talked about mechanisms of denial, so kind of this sociological approach to understanding the theory originally treated genocide. Why do people turn a blind eye to genocide? And then this gets applied to thinking about, the kind of life aspect of animals, talking about cognitive dissonance too, and the separation between those concepts and connecting the meat they eat with the practice of butchering. Euphemisms about talking about death with respect to animals, and the notion of idyllic traditional agriculture was expressed very well in the reading that they did too by Maud Roucan. And the key term there, neocarnism. So I begin here. Renan is going to speak to us for several minutes. He'll repeat some of these concepts, I'm sure, but I wanted to signal them as kind of the background and what I hope my students are taking out of it today, these ideas. So I will stop right there and hand it over to our speaker. Oh, I would signal too that Professor Hoffman in the chat has given students the link. So please sign up on those lists, including my students, so that we can take attendance and give you points for that. Okay, Professor Larue.
Okay. Share. Okay, can you see my screen? Is it working?
It's working. Yep. There you go.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Heller, for the very nice introduction. Thank you, Nicolas as well, and thank you everyone for being here today. So today I'm going to talk about gastronomic controversies. I'm going to talk about veganism, and a topic that has been addressed by Maud Roucan in her little text about sustainable agriculture. So before starting, I would like to say a few words about a concept that you might not be familiar with, the concept of Carnism. So the concept of Carnism was coined 15 years ago, something like that, by Professor Melanie Joy. She's a psychologist and she's also like an animal rights activist. And she explained that it's pretty obvious that vegetarians and vegans, most of the time, they choose to abstain from eating meat, fish, and sometimes cheese and eggs for some ethical purpose. It's not only about food. There is something behind that. So there is an ideology behind veganism and vegetarianism. And she explains that it's also true with people who don't abstain from those products. So meat eaters have also an ideology. It's less obvious because they are not the minority, but there is still an ideology behind that. So that's what she called Carnism. So this is how she defines it. Carnism would be the invisible and dominant belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals and insist on certain animals because in the West, at least, we only eat like a tiny fraction of animals within the animal kingdom. We eat pigs, we eat chickens, turkeys, cows, but we don't eat swans, we don't eat rats or bats or dolphins or cats, obviously. So there is also this ideology behind the standard, let's say, diet. So that's something she's pointing out. She's also explains that very, very often when meat eaters have to deal with vegetarians or vegans, they tend to justify their diet, their food habits, and they would use what she calls the 3 N's of justifications. It's natural, it's normal, it's necessary. So I need to eat protein. Eating animals is totally normal. Everybody does that. That's the way things are, and it's natural. So like we evolved eating meat. That's a part of what we are, of what nature is about. So this ideology, Carnism, is hegemonic, of course, but it's not universal. It's not universal today because there are vegetarians and vegans in the US and pretty much everywhere in the world, but also because in the history, like back in the antiquity, for instance, people were challenging the consumption of animal products. So it was true in India, obviously, in other parts of the world. It was even true in Europe and even in France. So a part of my work was about the debate about vegetarianism and veganism in antiquity. And those debates were very interesting and also very fierce. People would totally disagree on the fact that we should or we shouldn't eat animals. And it's also true in France. It's really started again during the 18th century with extremely famous writers and thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, Condorcet, Maupertuis, Bernardin Saint-Pierre, and some others who advocated for a vegetarian diet for ethical, anthropological and religious reasons sometimes. So this movement that restarted in France during the 18th century is way more powerful today, and it's related to the development of sensitivity and the creation of new norms. So the very first historian and sociologist who talked about that was Norbert Elias, and he explained that from the Renaissance on, people tended to become more and more sensitive. more delicate, more compassionate also. So it's harder and harder for us to see violence around us. When two people are fighting, it's extremely disturbing, but it was not disturbing at all 2 or 3, 4 centuries ago. And it's true with a lot of things, a lot of human behavior, but it's also true when it comes to animals. So now seeing an animal being slaughtered can be extremely painful and disturbing for most people. So it's even more true because like only a very small percentage of the population doesn't see and kill the animals they eat. So it's very, very rare. So if you are a fisherman, of course, if you are a hunter, if you are a farmer, you see the animals you're going to eat, but most of us just don't do it. So it accelerates this sensitivity. When you don't see violence around you, you tend to be more compassionate and more sensitive when you see it. So other thinkers like Keith Thomas or Steven Pinker talked about that, the new development and the creation of new social, psychological norms. So when it comes to France, 2015 was really a turning point because thanks to this organization L214, which is like an animal rights organization, a lot of videos and pictures were taken in slaughterhouses and factory farms, and they released the videos on their social platform, and it became extremely well known in 2015, 2016 that there were issues in our slaughterhouses, and it sparked intense debates within the French public about our right to eat or not animals. So 2015 really a turning point. So until 2015, like the US and Germany, Northern Europe, England was way ahead of France when it comes to animal rights and the awareness of the public. But thanks to L214, everything changed in a couple of years. So there is also a turning point based on the new arguments about animal agriculture. And obviously, vegan organizations like L214 or PETA in the US are using the fact that animal agriculture, especially factory farms, and the fishing industry are extremely detrimental for our planet. So those arguments are pretty well known today. Animal agriculture has to do also with pandemics, because when you gather so many animals in one tiny space, the development of diseases is accelerated. Also, the overconsumption of red meat and dairy can be detrimental for your health. Hence, the UN's recommendations about decreasing the consumption of animal products, especially in the West. So this is like the development of and the rise of vegetarianism and veganism in the West in general and in France in particular. So because of that, a new thing is happening in our culture, what we call the meat paradox, which is a form of cognitive dissonance. That's what you said, Professor Heller. People are torn because they have two opposite tendencies. We tend to be non-violent. We don't like to see other beings being tortured or killed or slaughtered. And at the same time, we don't want to give up our food habits. So on one hand, people will say, I care about animals, I don't want them to suffer. I know the detrimental impact on the environment and on the future generations. But at the same time, I love cheese. I cannot give up my hamburgers, and it's too good. It's really a part of who I am. And it might be even more true in France, because of course in the US, hamburgers or some beef can be or chicken can be very linked to the culture. But there is something even more true with French cuisine, because it's really like what we do. One of the things we do better, like we are better at food, and the best meals in French have to do with animal products. So it's very hard to give up cheese or to give up like some red meat. It's might be even more difficult for a French person than for an American person, I believe. So because of that because the cognitive dissonance is not a pleasant state of mind, you want to overcome it. So people would sometimes kill the messenger. People would say that vegans are annoying, so lot of them are annoying, that's true, but not all of them maybe. They would say that eating meat is natural, convenient. That's what Melanie Joy explained. They would talk about protein, and they would also bring God, this idea that God created the human race and put it at the very center and very top of everything, and all the animals have been created just for the sake of the humankind. So this idea is very, very central in a couple of religions, especially Christianity. So for instance, when you presented Maud Roucan's excerpt, I was remembering that she said something like, les animaux étaient là pour nourrir les hommes. Je sais que comme nous, les animaux sont là pour servir un but. So like they have a purpose. Their purpose is to be eaten by human beings. So it's not like they say, it's not scientific at all. It's not Darwinian at all. There is no purpose in nature. It's a metaphysical, it's a Christian, metaphysical, anthropocentric statement. They are here for a reason, and we are the reason they are here. So it's very, very, very strong, of course. And I think most of the time, the most profound and deep justification of animal consumption is metaphysical and or religious. That's my take on the problem. So people are and for a lot of Christians, it's very difficult sometimes to justify the consumption of meat, or they're a bit lost. They don't know what to think, or they would ask their priests, and it can be very disturbing for them. So because of this cognitive dissonance and because of all the bad consequences of animal agriculture today, there is a new way to find a solution to overcome it. There is a third way, and the third way is what Maud Roucan and a lot of people are actually putting forward, the idea that we can be conscious consumers. And obviously one of the most famous thing about that is the happy meat, or the organic meat. And I think that happy meat is really a part of what we can call neocarnism. So neocarnism is like a reaction to the rise of vegetarianism and veganism in the West. People would say, I don't want to be a vegan for different reasons, and I cannot support factory farming anymore because it's too bad. The way animals are treated is awful. So I want to find a third way. I want to strike a balance between those two things. And that's what we call in France, agriculture raisonnée. And the position became famous at the end of the 90s. I would say like 25 years ago. It was held and promoted by a couple of very famous figures. So you mentioned José Bové. Yeah, he's one of them. I would mention Jean-Pierre Coffe, who was extremely famous in France. He died, I think, like a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Périco Legasse, who is a journalist. Jocelyne Porcher, she used to be a farmer. She's now a researcher. And they promote those ideas. And actually, so this is Jean-Pierre Coffe. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, so this is one of his books. So it's pretty clear. Arrêtons de manger de la merde. So let's stop eating crap, something like that. And he's talking about the food system in general, and he was also talking about animal agriculture. So the same thing happened in the US with Joel Salatin, for instance, or Michael Pollan, who is extremely well known, I believe. So the same process. Let's find a third way. And obviously, they would promote the organic meat, the small-scale farm with this, and the use of this image, this idea that we can get back to the farms of our ancestors, like this a tiny farm with happy animals, grazing, nature, being happy. So the background of this slide, all the slides, is actually taken from a commercial created by the French lobby of red meat. So they are promoting this idea. We are doing that. We want to get back to the old and more sustainable farms. So this position is becoming totally mainstream, at least in France today. Every French person would tell you that they are eating less meat and they want to eat less meat, but they want better meat. I would only eat meat once a week or twice a week, something like that. Everybody would say that. I mean, you can ask Nicolas or Benjamin. But that's something very, very common today. That's a very, very mainstream position. The thing is, I think it's just a position because it's very, very hard to implement. Most of the time, people said they would eat meat once a week or twice a week, but actually they just don't. I mean, the numbers, the percentage of the amount of meat consumed by French people is not decreasing. It's pretty stable. And people think about the organic meat they ate on Monday, but they don't think about the chicken they put in the sandwich. They don't ask, when they go to the restaurant where the meat comes from. So we remember the good points, but we tend to forget the bad ones. So it's mainly an idea. It's a good idea. It's a positive idea. I'm not saying the contrary, but it's not very easy to implement in real life. One of the reasons being it's not scalable at all. So factory farming exists just in order to meet the demand. People want to eat eggs and cheese and meat. So because of that, so the only way to produce this amount of animal food is to create those factory farms. There is no other way around. So the industry is not bad per se. We don't have any other option. We had to put all the animals in one little space because the earth is too small for them. If all the animals could graze in nature, in the fields, they would take too much space. So we need to feed them with grains and put them in cages or in small barns. There is no other way around. That's one thing. The second thing is the fact that if people really wanted to switch to sustainable farming, agriculture raisonnée, well, there is only two rational options. So the price of animal products is going to skyrocket. So not maybe 1% will be able to buy animal food, but maybe 10 or 15%, 20% tops, because it's going to be too expensive. So this is one option. So if we keep the free market, that's the consequences of the generalization of happy meat. Or the other option would be the use maybe of ration cards, because if people decide that it's not fair that only 5 or 10% of the population is allowed or can afford to eat meat, if it's unfair, we should give the right of everyone to eat meat or cheese at least twice a week or something like that. So we'll have to create ration cards, and we don't want that either. So again, it's the system is bad right now, but it's very, very hard to change. And because of that, because of the very strong demand, farm animals cannot live a long and happy life, and the effects on the environment cannot be mitigated in the current state. And yeah, that's for basic economic reasons. Okay, 17 minutes, perfect. So something else, because the concept of happy meat the idea is very strong, but on a practical level, it doesn't work very well, but it's still a powerful and I think a very convenient myth. So it's powerful for consumers because we tend to care about the nature and the animals. So we want to believe in that. And it's also very good for the industry because it's a way to reassure the consumer, let's say. So you would see like happy animals everywhere on packaging or in commercials. It's very, very common. You will always see animals grazing, but you will never see slaughterhouses, for instance, in commercials. Never, ever, even though that's the most important thing. You have to turn a living animal into meat. So we will never see that, obviously. Something that is also very interesting in France today, the promotion of flexitarism, the idea that people should eat better meat, but on a less, but not really on a daily basis. That's the official logo now of the French lobby of meat. So Interbev, which is the professional organization, explains that people should aimer la viande et en manger mieux. That's their official logo. So this is a picture taken at the Salon de l'Agriculture, the agriculture festival in France. That's the official thing. So it's very, very important because we would never like those organizations would never talk about flexitarism or the decreasing of consumption of meat. Never ever. It's changed in the last couple of years. It's very, very strong and very, very interesting, I think. And yeah, of course, they would also use, this is very interesting, they're going to use the popular proponents of happy meat in their own commercials. So I was talking about Jean-Pierre Coffe a couple of minutes ago, and he was paid by the industry to do commercials for them. So a leader price, it's like the very, very low quality food store, especially with the meat. So his whole life, Jean-Pierre Coffe was fighting like processed meat, and he's promoting now a processed meat for usually poor people or minorities. So there was no real introduction to this talk, but there will be a conclusion. So very quickly, I will talk about what we can call the happy meat paradox. So there is a paradox because people genuinely want to do better. They want to improve the sake of animals, and they care about the environment. But the paradox is they think they are doing better, they want to do better, they think they're doing better, but nothing changes really. So that's what Gramsci would call a passive revolution. So the industry is pretending that it's changing a lot, but they just adapt a little bit what they say. But practically, it doesn't change much. So here, I'm not saying that the industry is bad per se. I'm not saying that there is no other way around. And I actually believe that the industry may be able to mitigate the effects on animals and the environment. I really believe that the plant-based meat, for instance, is a good way to change things. So I'm not very optimistic in general about animal agriculture, but I really think that agribusiness can adapt and can sell products that are less detrimental for the future generations and for today's animals. Thank you. That's it. Or 22 minutes. Perfect. Right on time.
Okay. Perhaps they're perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Professor Larue. That was really interesting. I think a very nice survey of recent attitudes as well as ideas and ideologies. So thank you so much. I'd like to call in a few of my students first, since they prepared questions. And then in the next portion, we have about 45 minutes at this point. If other participants in the seminar would like to ask questions, please do that in the chat so that I can see what they are and I'll monitor that. All right. A number of my students' questions. Tiffany, do you want to ask yours?
Sure. Sorry, I have my throat. Let me find it really quick. If it were not for society's industrialization of farming and food production, would you believe it possible to ethically produce animal products?
Can you repeat the first part of the question? Sorry.
Of course. If it were not for society's industrialization of farming and food production, do you think that that it would be possible to ethically produce animal products?
Well, there are different things. The main question, one of the main ethical questions is: are we allowed to exploit and kill animals? That's the core question here. So if you read philosophers like Pythagoras, from Pythagoras until today Peter Singer, or especially Tom Regan and some others, they would argue that no, you are not. It's not ethical. It's not fair. So it's much better to improve the conditions, the animal welfare. But it's better, but it's not perfect. The right thing to do would be not to kill them, and they would argue that they would argue that the foundation of rights is not logic or reason or the ability to speak, but the ability to suffer. So you and me have rights, not because we are smart or stupid or human beings, but because it would be unfair to harm each other, you know. And the thing is, if I was extremely stupid, if I were like extremely non-smart, it doesn't change anything. It's not based on how smart I am. It's based on how much I can suffer if you slap me in the face or torture me. So based on that, animals shouldn't be used and shouldn't be tortured. So it doesn't mean that you are not allowed to kill them under no circumstances, because if a lion is attacking you, if a brown bear is attacking you, of course, you have to defend yourself. I will kill the bear to protect you. But since sheep or cows are not attacking you, it's very, very hard to justify. That's their position. So it would be better, like the happy meat concept is not bad, it's much better. And if I would love that we live in a world where there is no factory farms anymore. It would be much better. But I wouldn't be sure that it would be perfect or totally ethical.
I know that some people also think that we don't that humans don't have the right to take anything from animals, not necessarily including like eating their meat, but for instance, taking the eggs of chickens or the milk of cows. What's your stance on that?
Okay, so the thing with eggs, it's a very good question. So people will say, oh, if I had some chickens in my backyard, it would be totally okay too. And yeah, I mean, you wouldn't hurt like those animals. That's okay. The thing is, where are the males? You know, it means if you have chickens in your backyard, it means that you have to slaughter to kill all the males. That's the thing. The same thing with milk. You know, where are the males? So we use female calves, you know, and we fatten up and we kill the males. So it's very, very hard actually. So like the dairy industry we need to kill males. And I didn't mention that, but if we could you know, spare the males, you know, we would have to feed them. I'm talking about cows and bulls. So you would have to feed them until the end of their life, and they can live 35 years. So we take a huge amount of space and resource to feed them. So we don't do that. We fatten them up for like a couple of months, and then we kill them and we eat them. And we use the milk for cheese. So it's very hard. So everything is like entangled actually, and way more than people think. So, oh, we're not doing anything bad. We're not killing, you know, killing any animal when we eat cheese, but actually you do. I mean, it's not direct, but it's indirect. It's still there, and we don't have any other option. We have to kill because it would be way too expensive to have so many males.
Thank you.
I'd like to call next on Matt Kincaid, because you asked your question.
Yes. My question is, hypothetically, if the majority of the world's population were to adopt a vegetarian or vegan diet, do you think that there would be more or less food security for people living below the poverty line?
Well, a very, very smart question. So it would be much better because like 90% of the time, the meat we eat implies that you need to use a lot of water, a lot of resource to it. So like 1 pound of meat means 7 pounds of grains most of the time. So actually people would say, oh, in factory farms, we are producing food, but that's the other way around. We are wasting food. We are wasting a lot of food. So that's something you have to keep in mind. So obviously in some places, like in mountains, it's very hard to do agriculture. So it's more ecological, more sustainable to have animals grazing. That's much better. And you kill them and you haven't destroyed any plants or resources, and you can eat the meat directly. That's That's right. I'm not denying that, but most of the time we just, we grow grains and we feed the animals with that. So we're actually destroying a lot of resource and a lot of water, and pesticides are very detrimental for the soil and for the rivers as well. So if you eat 1 pound of grain, you just use water, etc. But when you eat 1 pound of meat, you are killing an animal, and you're also destroying 7 pounds of grains, of plants. So at the end of the day, we could have way more space, for food, and it would be better. So that's one thing. The second thing is the fact that in the US, the meat, and it's also true in Europe. So the meat and the dairy industry is heavily subsidized by the government. So actually, the price of meat and dairy is way higher than you think, because of the taxes you pay, you subsidize, the McDonald's, for instance. Like, let's talk McDonald's and the cheeseburger. So the cost, maybe it's like $2 or $3, something like that, but the real cost is like more like 13, 12, 14 bucks. So we are wasting a lot of money because of that too. So that's, you have to think about what it takes to produce meat, and you also have to think about the consequences of that, because all the pesticides we use to produce meat, you have to spend a lot of money in order to depollute the rivers and so on and so forth. So that's what we call the external consequences of what we do. So when you study economics, you have to think about that. So there is the money you spend right now when you eat a hamburger, but you also have to think about the taxes you're going to pay, or you already paid, to subsidize that. So I think if like in the US, if everybody was a vegan, I think if with the same amount of taxes we pay, I think food can be free. I mean, vegan food can be free, because you can check online, but like the meat industry receives a lot of money from the government. It's just insane. So yeah, that's something else. I really believe that the food can be free, but of course we'll have to change a lot our food habits. That's a big thing.
Subsidies came in during farm crises, especially in the 1980s, where small family farmers were being pushed out because they didn't have the capital required to get into the new equipment and farm larger fields. So that happened in my own family, where the small town farmers in the Midwest were losing their farms in huge numbers. So I think what you're saying is really important, that this is a very complex economic problem.
Yeah.
As ideology aside, if you change things like this, it means changing the livelihoods and the training and land use of a lot of people.
Thank you for your question.
Liv, could you pose your question next?
Sure. Give me 1 second to set up my camera. Okay. Hi. Okay, so I asked, I said there has been a lot of criticism recently on the vegan movement, as people have begun to reevaluate somewhat culturally insensitive remarks and agendas put forth by vegans. Many vegans will claim that there is no ethical or moral way to eat an animal, yet many indigenous and non-European cultures have raised animals ethically for centuries, and their consumption is a fundamental part of their diet. In addition to this, most Western vegans are usually affluent and white, and the food trends promoted by them have had devastating effects on from which cultures they grab. For example, quinoa in Bolivia. Because of the popularity now, Bolivian farmers cannot afford their staple grain. I said, what is your response to this? Despite these insensitivities, do you believe that the overall message of the vegan movement still has the moral high ground? And then could you concede that ethical production and consumption of meat is possible, or is all capitalist production of meat inherently unethical?
So this was a beautiful question, Liv, but I think with the mask, it was a little bit hard to understand. So maybe I'll summarize a couple of key points. Is that okay? So you're talking about the criticism of the vegan movement. There's reevaluation of some somewhat culturally insensitive remarks and agendas put forth by vegans. You know, so you're bringing up another paradox here. Most Western vegans are usually affluent and white. And trends prompted by them have had devastating effects on cultures from which they appropriate. And Liv gives the example of quinoa. So maybe you talk about, you mentioned privilege currently going along with privilege going along with meat consumption in the future, if we change some things. But could you talk about privilege and veganism? And I like her example of quinoa too.
Oh, that's a very good question. Thank you. Thank you very much. So okay, just a couple of things. So you're absolutely right. The vegan movement, most of the time, when you just Google like veganism or vegan people, vegan person, you know, when you Google it, you'll see like white faces everywhere. That's for sure. Like, so we did that with my students 2 or 3 years ago. So it was pretty clear. It was like 90% of the faces were white. So that's very true. At the same time, the percentage within the Black community, the percentage of vegans is higher than in the white community in the US today. So it's really changing. So that's one thing. And there is, if you're interested in those issues, you can read Seal and Half Co, K-O, or Breeze Harper. There is also a very good documentary made by Jasmine Leva called The Invisible Vegan. It's about veganism within the Black community. It's excellent. And she was one of my guest speakers 2 years ago. She became a friend. So it might change a little bit your perception about it. And the thing is, I think it's true. Like, why the white upper class vegans, they tend not to talk too much about veganism within the Black community or within, you know, the other minorities in the US. So that's very true. Okay. Also, cultural appropriation. The thing is, so it's a very good point. In my work, I was working on the West and the history of vegetarianism in the West, all the debates in the West, because it's pretty clear that in other places in the world, especially India, vegetarianism is a very old idea. So my point was like, okay, we know about ahimsa, non-violence towards animals in other places, but what about Europe? What about the Greeks? What about the Romans? And what about us, like the West? And it turns out that they had more or less the same ideas. So we shouldn't harm other beings. They suffer. We shouldn't do that. We have something in common, the ability to feel. We are smarter, yes, but we're not fundamentally smarter than them, and so on and so forth. So I don't know if veganism in the West can be seen as cultural appropriation, because it's also a Western idea. It's also a Western idea. That's a part of my answer. When it comes to quinoa, that's for sure. So the consumption of quinoa in the West is very bad for the global South. I totally agree with that. But at the same time, we are also in the North, the global North, we are also using a lot of grains, you know, produced in the global South. And so I don't know about that in the US, but I know that in Europe, especially in France, like the vast majority of the soy eaten by the livestock comes from the Amazon forest. So French people, European people are destroying the Amazon forest in order to feed the cattle. But like, I think the percentage of soy imported, like it's 97% of the soy imported from Brazil is for the pigs, and especially for the cows. So we are also destroying that. So it's not, so quinoa is a good example. We have to think about it, but also we have to think about other products we are eating. And we also have to keep in mind that if the consumption of dairy and red meat is bad for the planet in general, especially for places, Africa, where, you know, the consequences are terrible. So like the climate change in Africa is going to be the worst, you know, everywhere on the planet. So we also have a responsibility, I think, in the North about what we eat, because we don't want people to suffer. So those people don't eat as much as we do, and then we're going to suffer way more than we do about the consequences of our action today. Something else. Oh yeah, something else about. I was thinking about that the fact that we like let's say white vegans in the US would appropriate food from the global South. That's a very good point. But also think that the US industry, like McDonald's and like the meat and dairy industry, did the exact opposite with Mexico, for instance. So in Mexico, the rate of obese people is the highest in the world. Why? Because the US created a lot of, like McDonald's and other companies. They convinced Mexican people that they should eat more dairy and eat more meat because that's a part of their culture. And the result of that is a huge health issue over there. And like the US industry like tried they did their best to make Mexican people forget about their own food culture, their own tradition. Because the Mexican food traditionally is based on plants, like corn, avocados, and stuff like that. It's cheese, yes, a little bit, meat, very, very rarely. So that's something we have to keep in mind. There was this very interesting book about Mexican food in Mexico and in the US. It's decolonize your diet. So if you are a Latino, a Chicano, or a Chicana, you don't forget that the meat you put in your tacos is not traditional at all. Okay, that's something I wanted to. I'm not saying that you are wrong. I'm just adding another parameter to your.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of things you're saying. I just wanted to ask you kind of like a hardball question, right. Or like, there's also a really good book about the importation of American corn into Mexico and the destruction that NAFTA has had on it. It's called Eating NAFTA, which is like another really good book on that topic, which goes through like how the importation of specifically corn, but other meats into Mexico has devastated the population. And I've seen that in my own family too. So yeah, no, I definitely agree. My main like thing about just the appropriation of like different food types. Yeah. So you answered that really well. And yeah, I do agree. I study Latin America specifically with one of my majors, and the just deforestation in Brazil is a huge problem, and it's all for cattle farming. So yeah, when I mentioned like traditional diets, a lot of places I was talking about, there's a lot of nomadic peoples, specifically in like Central Northern Asia, that depend on meat for their diet, and I was kind of talking about things like that too. But yeah.
So I think so. So the world is not perfect, and it would be better if Earth was heaven on earth, but it's not the case. So in many places, like you were talking about indigenous people that in Canada, for instance, and like in December, what can you eat? I mean, you have to slaughter animals to eat them, and nobody would say anything against that. So like, I think being vegan is doing the best you can do, as much as you can do it. So that's the thing. So again, I think the first students asked about killing animals. I would kill a fish. I would eat a fish if I had nothing else to eat. That's for sure. And the same thing, if a bear would attack you, I would kill the bear. But the thing is, I don't think we should use indigenous people and what they have to eat in order to justify what we can eat or what we are eating today. These are two different things.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I was just talking about how like there's been some backlash about prominent vegans on like, I guess, internet space have made very insensitive remarks and blanket statements about everyone. So I was just kind of asking you against that. But I agree with you.
There are idiots everywhere, so that's for sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Liv. Let's see. I was going to call on Kayla McCule, excuse me, I'm saying it wrong, Kayla, who had a question about some of the French terminology. Kayla, could you speak next?
Okay.
Sure. So I'm wondering specifically why you choose to use the word vegan instead of végétalien.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't say végétalien. I would have said végétalien if the talk was in French, actually. And okay, So
maybe we can explain that vegetarian.
I can explain briefly. So, okay, so we have the word vegetarian was coined in England in the 1840s, something like that. It became more popular with the creation of the Vegetarian Society in 1844. Okay, and a few decades later in France, at the end of the 19th century, a group of leftists promoted veganism, but they called it végétalisme because they said vegetarianism is not coherent, it's not logical, because you have to exploit the animals, and at the end of the day, you have to kill them in order to produce eggs or milk. So they said vegetarians are nice people, but they're not very coherent. So we should go one step further. So they coined the concept of végétalisme or végétalien. Those arguments are very funny and very interesting to read. And then the word vegan was created in 1944 by a British man, Donald Watson. And the word vegan became more popular. But in French, we have three words: végétarisme, and we have végétalisme and veganism and veganism. So veganism, I used when I talk about, I make the distinction between the two. Veganism is more about the ethics behind what you eat, and végétalisme is more about the food habits. So you can be a végétalien for health reasons or because you care about the environment. But I would use the word vegan to talk about the ethical approach, regarding animals, because you can be on a vegan diet. You can be vegetarian even if you wear, like, let's say, fur, or if you have leather, on your shoes or something like that. It's very, very different. It's more based on your diet, on your health issues, and so on and so forth. And I use veganism or veganism in the talk because you don't have the distinction in the English. So yeah, there is a distinction. It's plant-based diet and veganism. So yeah, I should have said that. So that's a very good remark. Thank you.
That's great. That's very helpful. Just for us as language culture students. Awo, do you want to ask your question next?
Yeah, I can. So my question is, how can we make vegan food more accessible to populations that either can't afford vegan products or that live in places where there's really only fast food available and not grocery stores with fresh products?
We use the word deserts, which is another really important kind of political question right now.
Yes, perfect. Very, very good question. Okay, two things. Number one, vegan food or plant-based food is not that expensive. When you're talking about what you're thinking about, I believe, is plant-based alternatives and organic fruits or vegetables. And I totally agree with you. It's if you eat rice, it's not very expensive. But in food deserts, I think it's outrageous that in some places in the US, people don't have any access to healthy food. It's just, for me, the Black Lives Matter movement was necessary. And people were talking about systemic racism in the police, in the institution. But there is also something that people don't talk enough, I believe, the fact that within the Black community, and it's also true with Hispanics in the US, the life expectancy is shorter. So on average, a Black man is living he died 8 years earlier than a white or Asian person. And I think it's outrageous. And one of the main reasons of that is the food, people in those communities are eating. Because obesity, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases and stuff like that, it's totally related to the food people are eating. So I totally agree with you. I mean, it's awful. I mean, people should have access to food. And I was talking about the price of food in the US. So people, Hispanics and people in places where they cannot find healthy food stores. There are McDonald's and KFC everywhere. And those companies are targeting minorities to convince them they should eat more of those things. So you would see more Black kids and more Hispanic kids in those commercials because they are targeting them. And it's, I don't know, it's just insane. I mean, it's totally, like, it's really a political question. And people don't think too much about it. Also because within the Black community, there is this idea, I believe, that we want to eat those food because, like, fried chicken, it's important, it's a part of our tradition, of our culture. And I totally understand that. But at the same time, it's also detrimental for their health. So, and it's not only about like racial communities, it's also like, it's like a universal question. Everybody should have access in the US, and it doesn't depend on your race, on your income. You should have access to healthy food. And in schools, it's like even everywhere, the kind of food, like students in junior high school, the kind of food they eat, it's unbelievable. It makes them sick. I don't understand. I mean, I might be very French right now, but I don't understand. And you know what? In France, it's better. It's not perfect either, but it's the basic human right. You have the right to eat healthy food, and for the within the Black community, a lot of people are allergic. They cannot digest milk, and there is milk everywhere. And it's people, they can have they cannot breathe that well because of allergies to milk. They cannot digest milk. They just cannot digest milk, and you will find milk everywhere. So only 25% of the human population can digest milk, only 25%. So some people in Africa, in some parts of Africa, in Northern Europe, very well, but in Asia, for instance, or 80% in Africa, people cannot digest milk. And people of African descent who are living in the US are fed with stuff that makes them sick. So it's really a political question, and thank you for raising that. Yeah, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do to fix the problem, but I think we should talk more about those questions. It's totally unfair, unethical.
Quite a few students had questions about the expense of food and also the health effects of food. And I think what we're talking about is how interconnected they are in the American culture, but in French culture too. The French have historically been healthier. Ohio was the 5th most obese state in the union when I moved here in 2000. I don't know what our ranking is now, but there's a national question about obesity as well as cost. Evan Bauer, are you there? I wanted Evan to ask his question, but that's okay. Let's see. Mark Anthony Arceno, or Arceno, I assume that's not an Italian name, had a wonderful set of questions. He's the chapter leader of Slow Food. So Mark, could you speak a little bit now?
Sure. So thank you, Renan, for your presentation. So yeah, just as a comment, an opening comment, I just want to say I very much appreciated the perspectives you were sharing. It seems that there's a lot of alignment between, this notion of happy meat and what Slow Food calls, for slow meat, and trying to approach this ethical point of view. On a different note, you had mentioned earlier in 2015 the mention of the slaughterhouses with adjudicateurs and exposing this, the meat industry. But it reminds me of the work of like Florence Blackler and others who work on les abattoirs and ritual and halal consumption among Muslims in France. Like, where are they going to go to have this ritual practice of halal for their meat? And I'm just curious if your research has coincided with similar work with meat practices of religious traditions. And this question that I have of who can or cannot impose what or even how to eat the food that they're eating. And to what extent does the perspective of vegan or vegetarianism reflect all of France? Like, who is France? Are the groups that you found aren't necessarily included in the discussions? So while the slaughterhouses are exposing the meat industry, what is left for the religious groups who might need a slaughterhouse, but a ritual space?
Yeah,
Food they're eating.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not a specialist of Islam, for instance, but I'm very interested in religion. So in my Encyclopedia of Veganism, La Pensée Végane, I wanted to have a specialist of Islam and animals. So she did a very interesting job about those questions. And I know that the consumption of halal meat. So you have to keep in mind that eating meat is not mandatory when you are a Muslim. That's one thing. It's almost mandatory if you are a Christian, because you cannot reject food given to you by God. It's not that true in Islam, and because the Prophet came not only for human beings but for the creation as a whole. That's one thing. So the halal meat is a very complex question in France, because let's say that a lot of people, especially on the far right, would target Muslims and would target halal slaughterhouses, saying that, look at those barbarians, they don't. Sorry.
Can you be sure, everyone, can you be sure to mute if you're not speaking right now?
Yeah, so people are targeting like the Muslim community, saying that they are barbarians because they slaughter animals in a way that is disgusting. So it's very common. It's very, very common. Very often, people who are opposing L214 will say, "Oh, you don't say anything about Muslims and slaughterhouses." And okay, so the thing is, with it's also true with kosher meat and halal meat, the same issue. Very, very often. Like in Islam and in Judaism, the way people should kill animals is ritualized. One of the main points is you have to prevent as much suffering as you can. So the blade has to be very, very sharp, because you don't want the animal to suffer. So there is ethics involved in that. And within the Christian community, it was not an issue at all. So now it's evolving, because like in the, let's say, post-Christian tradition in France, people say, oh, we have to be more compassionate towards the animals we slaughter. And now there is a conflict between the kosher meat, for the kosher meat and the kosher, the halal meat. People say, oh, we've done that for millennia. So we agree with that. The thing is, so there is this strange conflict. So who is the most compassionate towards animals? And I think that Christians and post-Christian people don't really realize that what halal meat actually means. So I'm not romanticizing halal meat either, because very, very often it's awful. I talked about that with a friend of mine, Jeffrey Cohen. He's the head of Jewish veg in the US. He said like the kosher meat industry is awful. So they are just putting the label kosher, but the way the animals are treated is not kosher. At all. Okay, so I hope I'm answering your question. And yeah, the ritual, I understand. So I understand that if organizations such as L214 and others are pushing for the vegan agenda, of course there will be religious questions about that. So I cannot respect or honor my traditions because you want me to stop eating meat, and I agree. It's a mess. It's a mess. It's a mess because when we talk about food, we don't talk about like stuff we put in our mouth. We talk about who we are, our identity, our religion, our traditions, our anthropology, and everything. So those questions are huge. It seems anecdotal, but the questions are very, very huge. So if a Muslim person is giving up meat, he or she might think, oh, I'm a traitor. I'm betraying my ancestors. I'm betraying my tradition. And I agree. It's a very big question. But I think you can reconcile Islam and Judaism with veganism much better than you can do in the Christian world. Because in the Christian world, everything is based on charity. That's the key concept. And the Lord Jesus Christ was a meat eater. So he was not charitable at all with animals. So because of that, for the church, it was very, very important to disregard vegetarians and vegans, like back in the days. you cannot be a vegetarian for ethical reasons if you wanted to be a Christian. It was not possible because you would disregard that gift from God, and you would be more charitable than the epitome of charity, Jesus. You cannot do that. So vegetarians and vegans, they were excommunicated from the church because of that. And there was this very deep tradition within a Christian world, so especially in the Catholic world. So if you talk with Catholics, most of the time they would say, oh, it's totally okay to eat animals because God said so. And they would be very reluctant to talk about vegetarianism and veganism. And it would be much easier with Muslims and with Jewish people, really. So and for instance, so we were talking about anthropocentrism. So in the catechism of the church, the catechism of the church today, like the official statement is everything has been created, like everything, like animals, the planets, stars, animals of the plants have been created for the sake of the human race, from the past, today, and in the future. So, and it's not the case in other religions. So I think, and it's even more true, like in Hinduism, Jainism, in other religions, it's way easier to reconcile those two things. So that's, I don't know if I answered your question, I just throw ideas in the air, but
the question,
it's a political question and a religious question as well. I totally agree with you.
Thank you. I think the slow movement, I thank you so much for coming to the talk, Mark Anthony. One of my students, Minna Mohammed, had a question that's very related to what you're talking about. Minna, do you feel like your question was answered, or would you like to enter the discussion a little bit here?
Yeah, sure. I guess my question is a little bit related to that. One second. Sorry.
Oh, it's just
my question was, meat and dairy plays a large part in so many different cultures. Do you really see a future where people can forgo those traditions for future sustainability? Like, how realistic do you think it is?
You mean everywhere in the world, or in the US? In the world?
Maybe, I guess either one would work. I mean,
Okay.
meat and also plays a big part of US food culture.
Of course.
Regardless.
Mm-hmm. I don't really know. I think what will happen, we won't have a choice. I think we will need to decrease the consumption of dairy and meat. That's for basic economic reasons. We won't have any choice. So we'll have, because the earth is not, the world is finite. So you cannot, we are lacking space, actually. We're lacking room. So, like for instance, in China, they were trying to emulate like the Western diet, let's say, but they're slowing down because it's too demanding. It's not healthy, and also they are lacking space for the food. So I think it was like 2 years ago they decided that they should divide by 2 the amount of meat produced in China. And the same thing will happen eventually in the US. So of course we might import a lot of dairy and meat, but that's one thing. That's one part of my answer. Also, I think that the development of sensitivity will keep moving forward. So I think we're going to be more and more sensitive to animal welfare. So I think people are going to decrease the consumption of meat. That's an intuition I have in the future. And one of the reasons is the fact that you can find more plant-based alternatives. So not everywhere, I agree, there are a lot of food deserts, but on campus, for instance, at UCSB, there are more and more vegan alternatives. So it helps, because the thing is, so it's not always your belief that can shape your behavior. It's most of the time it's your behavior that is shaping your beliefs. So if we were in India, if everybody was a vegetarian right now, it would be obvious that eating meat is disgusting. We think eating and killing and eating animals is awful because we never do that. But because we eat meat since we are born. We think it's normal, and we justify in retrospect, the legitimacy of that. So there were a lot of very interesting studies in psychology about that. So when you ask people what they think about animal intelligence and animal rights to people who just ate meat, they will say, oh no, they're not very intelligent. But if you give fruits to people and 5 minutes later you ask them what they think about the intelligence of a cow or the right of pigs, they will say, oh yeah, they deserve to be protected. So what we eat is shaping our ideology, really. So if plant-based food is more available everywhere, I think people will reconsider what they think about the world in general and animals in particular. And it's not even an intuition; it's true. And if more people are becoming vegan in let's say in 10 or 20 years, if let's say 20% of the let's say 10% of the population is vegan, you'll have friends around you who are vegan. There will be more vegan restaurants. So the peer pressure will be less intense. Because I think that a lot of people, 60, 70% would agree with the fact that slaughterhouses should not exist. And there were a very interesting survey, it was 2 years ago about that. So it's 70% of the US population would like a ban on slaughterhouses because we feel it's not fair, but at the same time we want to eat meat. So if the peer pressure is going down, if it's not such a stigma to be a vegan, I think people can switch. I'm not saying it will happen. I think it's the odds are a bit better.
Great, thank you. You were talking about Christianity. I would just note my field is medieval material culture, and that in the regular communities in monasticism, they're very they didn't eat meat in a number of orders, except for health reasons. There are
for asceticism, yeah,
right.
But not for ethical reasons. And it was very, very clear during the second and third century. You can be a vegetarian or vegan for asceticism because you want to tame your body in some way. So that's totally okay. But if you are a vegetarian for ethical reasons, it's bad. So that's why the church asked people who are on a vegetarian diet to eat meat at least once a year. And if they couldn't because they were disgusted, because it was not ethical, they would be punished. So it was a good way it was like an ordeal to distinguish good vegetarianism, which is like ethical, ascetical vegetarianism, and bad vegetarianism, which is for ethical reasons. So it was interesting because the church was like a trap for them. They were promoting charity, but not all kind of charity, only for humans. And when the West colonized India, there were a lot of debates about the diet of Indians, of Hindus, of Brahmins, because their diet was more ethical. But for people from Europe, it was just stupid, because why don't you eat animals? They don't understand, they don't know the true God. The true God told us that it was totally okay to eat animals. It was just superstition. I
think it's important to not treat the church as a monolith, right?
No, I'm talking about the church in Rome. I'm not talking about the Christians. I'm talking about the theologians, obviously. No, I totally agree.
Orders at different moments in time, and so it's important to think both on. This is one of the things you said. It's important to think both on the individual and public level.
Yeah,
we are just about at the end of our time. My student Emerson had a great question about eating insects, but maybe you want to do thumbs up or thumbs down on eating insects?
Me?
Sure.
Yeah,
there it is, right? Complicated question, isn't it? Okay, Nicolas Doué, did you want to come on just at the very end to say anything?
Yeah, sure. Thanks again to you, Sandra, for this great introduction. Thank you, Renan. I think it was wonderful, fascinating to see all the kind of intersection between veganism and all the contemporary changes in France as well as in the US. Thanks to Sandra and all the team from the PUF, also my colleagues from the French Embassy, Catherine and Sophie, Louise, and also Vincent. And of course, every one of you, especially the students, for making this wonderful exchanges possible. So the next event will be held October 12th. It's going to be in French with Clotilde Leguil to discuss sexual consent. And at the moment, the event with Christian Garcia is not confirmed yet. And there will be also one more event in English with political scientist Gilles Pinson talking about neoliberal city. And of course, you can get more information on the website and social networks, frenchculture.org. So thank you, everyone. Merci, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Larue, and thanks so much to the Center for Excellence, to you as the attaché culturel for all your help with this. And in the chat, we have lots and lots of merci beaucoup, a very stimulating time. So yes, and we'll keep thinking about all of these issues. It's been very provocative. Okay, I'll stop now.